James Hornick, it is good to have you here. Thank you so much for being on the show. I mean, it's not often that I have one of the top-ranked sarcastic commenters on LinkedIn here on the show live. And so I've got to say, I am really honored to have you here.
I mean, there's not many on LinkedIn is the problem, It's like, it's the wrong site for anything like fun or interesting or, if you'd probably have the top 10 boring LinkedIn writers on all the time, because that's pretty much everybody.
I feel like that's me. I people give me compliments that I do a good job on LinkedIn, but God, I kind of hate it that you have to do it. Like, is that your feeling too? It's like, it's just this like, I don't know, a lot of people patting themselves on the back and patting each other on the back, and it just feels a little toxic sometimes, but I don't know.
I think that the part of it is you have to be able to take a shit on whatever you're talking about at the same time is what keeps my sanity. I just don't take life seriously in general, and people who are just over seriously and stuffy. And like, I think that even if people have good advice, I think my issue with LinkedIn is that they're so overly serious about it. And half the time they're just talking about how to sell better. I'm just like, guys, it's not that hard, just be normal, connect with people. Your tricks and this and that and your leadership and how we need to worry about your mental health. And like, I'm just like, come on, people don't need this much instruction for basic stuff. So
it's a bit of a commercial, and that's kind of its role now, but it's also just like this necessary evil, it feels like. I mean, kind of like things like email marketing that I don't necessarily love personally, but they work, and so people do it, and therefore people keep investing in it, and it keeps working. It's just there's some things out there that I'm just like, I don't know that it has that much value in society, but whatever.
It absolutely does. And and those people who might be listening don't know me. Like, I act like myself on LinkedIn, which for some reason everyone thinks you need to act like this proper put together person. But like, every time I'm out at a networking event, someone will come up to me and be like, "Oh, the shit you said really made me laugh," or whatever. And it's just like, I just treat it like I would any other form of social media. Like, I don't know why there's this break that people have in their minds, but the reason why I say it is valuable is like hiring is what we do. We're a recruiting firm, but even our own internal hiring, it was a huge help. When we had like the boom time in like 2021, 2022, like we hired 50 people, I think. 60% of them first heard of us from LinkedIn and our LinkedIn presence. And I have to say that it's recruiting firms in general, typically, it can be hard to hire as a recruiting firm for yourself, because there's typically people come from everyone's had the same bad experience. Everyone's worked for some firm that they say, "Oh, we're different, we're employed," and then you get there and it's micromanagement hell. Like, everyone's had the exact. I had the same experience, like when you start out. So, but even when someone like says all the kind of buzzwords that everyone will say when they're trying to hire, no one believes it. But when you see me and 20 other people at my company just posting whatever the hell you fucking feel like, you know what I mean? They're like, okay, these guys have to be different.
Right. They're a little real.
Like, yeah. It's just like no one else would like just like make fun of people in comments in a good way. Like, that's the thing is, if you just show like genuine, people can see the difference between genuine personality versus like forced fun, and I think that's really kind of the difference. And that's made it easier for us to hire. So
I say this to early stage founders. They're asking me for marketing advice and thoughts all the time, because one of my companies really works with a lot of early stage 0 to 1 kind of startups we used to, and they always want to sound and look like the big corporate companies in their space. But I always ask them, like, dude, you're not going to be better than the name brand, publicly traded stock, like publicly traded company in your space. So just be different, like be yourself, be accessible, be a real person. It's so much easier for you to do. Like, the CEO at a Fortune 500 company can't be a real person online. They're not allowed to. They got a PR team that stops it. They got a legal team that stops it. Like they get shut down with very rare exceptions. Whereas the early stage startup can say whatever the hell they want and like use that to your advantage. Be a real person that's accessible and kind of fun and has a personality and is like somebody I want to talk to, right? There's a lot to that for sure.
And people sometimes conflate it with like, you're not trying to, because the other way you can go, like, you're not trying to be edgy. You're not trying to be provocative, like going out of the way. It's just like, it's being comfortable in your own skin and just knowing how. A good thing is I've had a background in writing before I did all this, you know what I mean? So like, I enjoy writing in my own phrasing and voicing, and that came easier. And then like just doing a few podcasts and like like how you and I are bullshitting right now. It's just like, I don't have to give you the company line. I don't know where this conversation is going to go today, Karl, but I guarantee we're going to have fun doing it. So
Exactly. I read on your LinkedIn, every time I'm on a podcast or someone else's podcast, my goal is to go further off the rails faster than the last podcast. So I was like, I'm just going to take James for that. And I'm going to take him off the rails on moment zero. So we're off the rails. Let's bring him back around. I'm just kidding. So in all seriousness, we've known each other through Chicago for the last year or two, probably. And then I've actually worked with your company as a client before, Hirewell. So, we've had, many different touch points in different ways. So tell me a little bit about Hirewell and kind of your background there, getting started with it, because you are a partner in, is it Chief of Growth? Is that right?
Yeah, Chief Growth Officer. What was going to say? Here's the pitch.
Yeah, give me the rundown.
We place leaders and we help them build their teams. That's the pitch we use. We're Chicago-based. We work nationally. I would say the things that set us apart is we do executive recruiting on down. We're actually built to be able to kind of work at all levels, starting kind of with the top level, because if you place an executive, like, they need to build a team, and no one knows them better and that company better than us if we did that placement. So, but the things that I think are most unique about us are, it took us 20 years to do it, but we actually build out 4 different practice areas, but even more specific vertical areas within that. We have a team that does nothing but tech. We have a team that does nothing but sales and marketing, so go to market. We have a team that does what we call corporate functions. They do HR and they do finance and accounting. And then we have a team that does industrial. So when companies need to hire, we can, for any office dork, as I like to call us, we have people who know how to fill out your entire office full of whatever variety of dork you need to work in your office job. Right. So, we can do those things, but we can do more interesting solution work then too. So when companies get a round of funding, or they have a divestiture, or they got a major project, they typically if you need to hire 10, 20, 30 people or 100 people, but it's in lots of different areas, we actually can plug and play, dedicate as many people who are needed, whether it's a flat rate project or whether it's some sort of kind of interest. Everything's kind of customizable, but we have the expertise to can hit the ground running and do it instantly and kind of turn that on. And then if it's done in 3 months, we can kind of back out and kind of come back when you need us. And it's more and the thing I always have to say, it's more cost effective. I'm the first one to ever say that, if you try to do, and you're familiar, if you've worked with us before, you worked with any recruiting firm before, fees on a single hire are high. And if you try to do that across 20, no one can afford to build an entire team off of traditional recruiting fees. And that's what we definitely, when we have these kind of volume engagements, we take that down. But long story short, we can deliver faster, quicker, with more expertise. We're also very good at talent advisory. And you've probably seen this before, because a lot of our people come from internal recruitment. We have a competency just around that. Companies starting out, we don't just find people, we actually can consult on what processes you need to do, interviews, do messaging, make sure comm structures are aligned, all these kind of behind the scenes things to make sure your hiring goes well and that you can actually retain people, because that's kind of the other kind of key thing. So yeah, it's building out the advisory aspects, another act of it too. A lot of that's baked into what we do. It's part of our job, but you'd be surprised, and maybe you've worked with other recruiting firms that, they send you people, then they're out the door. You don't hear back from them. They don't actually help you with the internal part of it, which is equally, if not more important than just finding people. So.
Totally. I was going to say, the thing I've noticed that separates a good recruiter from a shit recruiter is the good ones will be able to kind of give you a buzz of what's going on in that particular market, or what is actually possible to hire for. So I'll give you a real tactical example. Being a head of engineering at a small company, I'd often be looking for weird mishmashes of skills, right? And they're often weren't typical people who would fit those bills. And so I'd ask the recruiter, okay, look, I know I'm not going to get somebody who matches these 6 checkboxes that doesn't exist, but give me what are 2 or 3 profiles I could kind of look for. And then I can kind of figure out how I can make a position for each of those, and then sort of pick the one and train them on the other aspects or whatever, or find somebody who's more of a generalist. Does that exist? And again, the good recruiters will tell you, yes, we see those kind of people. Yes, they're going to cost you this, and we can probably find them. The bad recruiters will say yes to everything and then give you just completely crap results. But again, you can kind of figure out when they start to tell you, no, that's not possible, that's a good sign, because it's okay, good. Do you kind of know there's some limits here, right? Not every hire is going to be perfect, or at least, especially because, again, we could be trying to hire these weird roles that don't really exist.
Yeah, and it works the other way too, because sometimes like you'll like consult and tell a client like these 6 things you're looking for, they aren't realistic. You need to hear the options.
Right.
You're like, no, we want all 6. Like, this is a bad client. I'm not gonna do any
Yes,
work with.
that's exactly right. I think that's like in general in hiring. I think this is something that, especially when you're a relatively small business, and I think you actually kind of said this something about this on LinkedIn about employer prestige. If you don't have employer prestige, which most businesses don't, let's just be honest. Like there's some top 5% that do, but everybody else, it's like we're kind of we're a name no one's ever heard of. If you don't have anything to go from, like, and you aren't paying the toppest of top dollars, which again very few of us are, like you've got to be willing to compromise to some extent on certain things. Like there is trade-offs in recruiting, right?
Yeah. I guess if you're talking about getting people to join, so when I was talking about employer prestige, I was talking in a far more negative way. Like there are companies out there, or there's a lot of companies out there that have institutional arrogance. Like, and the thing is, I can totally empathize with founders or people who are excited about what they do, they're proud of what they did, but they fall in the classic trap of thinking everyone else can see how great we are, so of course they're going to want to work here. You know what I mean? And it's normal, but like you have to like have the self-awareness to realize that you have to phrase things in how this benefits the people you're trying to hire. So instead of touting, we made the best list of, the top 20 companies list, and, where we have these big goals and, whatever, it's got to be case studies or stories from our employees, why they joined, what they enjoy about the job, which is also why content has worked out for us, because they can see our employees kind of talking about that. But, or just kind of like, ultimately you have to be able to answer the question, like, why is this job better than the current job they're in? And if you can't verbalize that to yourself as someone trying to hire, like that's problem one. Like you have to be able to understand the market and where people are coming from, but then you have to kind of bake that into the process. So I think that, because you were talking about employer prestige, that people want to build employer prestige, and that's the wrong thing. Like stop trying to posture why your company's so great. Just posture more about like why it's just a good place to work for you. If I'm trying to hire you, like, what's in it for Karl? You know what I mean? Like those are the things you need to be leading with, because that's what very few companies do well.
Yeah. This kind of brings me into something I think about a lot. Like what does appeal to employees right now? And the job market is a moving, changing entity. And I'm sure that it's shifted in the last 3, 4, 5, 10 years. But right now, what do you see as like those sort of like the real big, maybe needle movers for good employees at this point?
Well, I mean, there's the obvious ones, which I'd be disingenuous if I didn't bring up: work flexibility and comp. Like, there's no way around that. Those are not probably the biggest no shit answers, but like, no one wants to work for a 5-day in the office company. I think most people have settled, both candidates and employers have settled on hybrid being kind of the better way to go about things. Like everyone just like, if you have a repair person coming on a Friday, you don't want to take a day off. You know what I mean? Just basic stuff like that,
Do you think the full 5-day office is kind of dead in at least the industries you guys work in?
A lot of them. I do worry. It could come back in the stodgier industries.
Totally.
I guess I should say it too. There are like real estate totally makes sense. If you're a company that leases offices, like you have to eat your own dog food. You have to go into like it just.
Healthcare is probably going to always be important. Maybe my wife works in healthcare. It's like she can't work remotely. She's got to be in a hospital.
We have a lot of industrial clients, manufacturing clients. There are certain jobs that are just in person, but like back to like office dorks, like it doesn't make sense for everyone to be at least 5 days a weekend. And I think most companies have kind of realized that. Certain exceptions being of like if you hire a lot of junior salespeople, you need to train them. Like it's hard to do that kind of remotely. What was your question? You're asking about what gets people interested.
Yeah. So what else do we do to move the needle? So comp obviously is always going to be a big thing. Do you see more or less or about the same amount of kind of variable comp these days than in the past?
Probably about the same. I don't know if we've seen a lot different there. Equity is going to be an interesting one kind of going into the next year, because I think that more and more people are getting wise to the fact that in most of the time, equity is kind of a bullshit play. Like they see someone worked for some high flying startup and made like $1 million in equity, and they're like, oh, I gotta get equity, that's how I cash it in. But like the overwhelming majority of companies that give out equity aren't going to make it, or if they do make it, it's not going to be at the comp variables you're looking at. Like I know plenty of people that have gotten equity at 3 or 4 companies and not made a dime, and that's just like because the company's never made it. But then there's also like if you work in places that are already public and you get in a strike price and like then then you still didn't make anything, you know. So I mean, there's been a lot of people kind of talking about this, and I think that more and more employees are getting like, you have to ask for a cash comp. And the reason why people would rather give equity than cash comp, because they know it might never be worth anything. And if it is worth something, it's because like the company made so much money that there's no downside. So it's always been kind of a risk-free proposition for a lot of organizations. So there are still people who are like, they still think, like candidate-wise, still think equity first, like that's what I want to go for. But I do feel like that's a shift that's been happening kind of slowly but surely. I'll see.
Well, it's also, I'll kind of chime in with a little bit of personal experience here too, because I've taken equity in a couple companies that I was an early employee in. And the VC world has also gotten more aggressive and shifted. And what that means is VCs are now demanding, in most cases, multiples on top of their returns before employee and common stockholders start to get compensated. So even if your company goes and sells for $100 million, I mean, company I worked for a few years ago sold for 50-some million dollars recently. My 1% was diluted and, you know, sort of like on the back burner as far as like comp goes. So even with that, I got a very, very minuscule, you know, comp from it, and much less than the sort of pay cut that I took. Again, I didn't care. Like it wasn't, at the end of the day, it was not make or break to me. It wasn't what I was banking my life on. But I agree with you, James. Like overall, the point is, as an employee, you're the last person on the poll of who's getting paid off when this thing sells. And so you have to be very cautious about that kind of equity comp, especially early stage companies. But
yeah, I agree with you on that. What else is kind of playing? So there's you can't really base anything off of what you read on LinkedIn, because LinkedIn comments, there's 3 people on LinkedIn. It's salespeople, it's recruiters, and it's really unhappy job seekers. So like those are the 3 main personas on LinkedIn. So like if according to LinkedIn, like people only want money because every company's trying to screw them. It doesn't matter who they're working for. That's not really the reality. And I do empathize with people who have been screwed over and are frustrated, but like you can't base your perception of what's going to attract employees based on the most unhappy people. This isn't anything earth shattering, but everyone's heard before, like people don't quit companies, they quit bosses. You know, I think people are at the point where they want to see companies doing well, and they want to know the company has strategy to grow or to do whatever they have. And they have realistic expectations, because so many people have been burned the past 2 years, getting laid off maybe multiple times. And they're realizing, okay, it's not just about the job. I need to dig into like, what's this company actually do? Like, are they going to be able to, like, is there stability based on that? So I think, which is hard to do for people, I think, looking at that. But then I do think that people are a little more attuned to making sure, who am I actually working with? Are these good people? Is this someone I can really communicate? Because there's a lot of, it's very easy to say, oh, this is the title I always wanted. It's the work I always wanted. The pay's pretty good. But is my boss going to be a jerk? It's hard to flesh that out maybe in the interview process when you're a job seeker, because everyone's putting kind of their best face on. But I do feel like there's more kind of two-way backdoor reference checking, if that makes sense, you know. So people do their own research on how good this manager at this company really is.
I honestly think that's always been the case with the top tier of employees, and maybe now it's kind of moving down. Like you know, the best employees, they sort of do almost a reverse job search, I think, where they kind of know what companies they sort of want to work for, and they figure out how to get there and work there. On the other hand, the sort of bottom of the barrel people are the ones who complain on LinkedIn about can't find, you know, work, and they're just, it's brutal. But
this is gonna be a really popular segment on LinkedIn, I can tell you.
Yeah,
this
right,
last 30 seconds.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't make this show for LinkedIn ratings. That's okay.
The other thing I'll say, it's a bit out of nowhere. I have talked to quite a few people who have had such a rough go working in SaaS. Maybe they're in sales, and they just been put through the grinder of like changing commission plans that don't pay. I do think there's a lot of people who are seeking more mission, like, what's this company do? Is what they do something I can at least believe in? You know what I mean? Or I think there's been so much bullshit technology that doesn't solve any problem. And that's great when everyone's getting paid and things are going well. But when, work also becomes hell on top of I'm not really doing anything meaningful with my life, I think there was a lot of people in that category saying, like, I want my next thing to be with a company that matters, or not necessarily nonprofit, but like something where at least they're creating something that's good and useful and I can feel good about what I'm doing. More so than I'd say that more so now than a few years ago when it was all about like boom times, whatever, I can make a lot of money doing this. So
yeah. I've noticed too, having been in both the funded and bootstrap side of small companies, often now running, companies that are bootstrapped and we don't raise money, we get a lot of good candidates who came from a venture funded background that are like, oh, I don't want to go through that roller coaster again. It's like, yeah, of course, when money's good, then everything's swinging up, and then it swings back the other way when you don't hit your targets or you don't raise that next round. Whereas a bootstrapped company, again, is a little more of a steady state machine. It's not going to grow as fast, but it's also not going to decline as fast. It's not going away and as quickly usually. So there are pros and cons there that you have to think about. But of course, attaching yourself to the right roller coaster can be fantastic for your career too. So let's talk about your career, James. This is my transition. No,
hard pivot.
Hard pivot. But this is one of those things that, for listeners to this podcast and myself, honestly, as an agency owner, I'm always curious about people who come into agencies early and join as, you're a partner, so you've got some stake in it, but you weren't a founder technically from the get-go. So tell me that story. Like, how'd you get involved with Hirewell, and what has that journey been like as your sort of role has changed and progressed?
So I told this story. Someone asked me how I got into recruiting, and then my answer was like, well, I needed a job, which is how everyone gets into recruiting, literally. But everyone gets into recruiting the same way. They needed a job and they went to work for the most awful firm possible. Like that's everyone's first recruiting job. So how I found Hirewell is after a year of working for the most awful company ever, I decided to like put some feelers out for something new. I went about it by asking, my sister has actually worked in HR for, she's a couple years older than I am, so a long time. And I asked her and some of her colleagues and other people I knew in HR, like what were some good firms they worked with? Simple as that. And two different people recommended the same firm, which is how I decided, like, hey, these guys are, we're talking to. And Hirewell was 4 people when I joined. And at this point, next to our founder, I've been here, I have the longest tenure, but I guess this ties back to what we were saying earlier. Like I decided to do my own due diligence by asking what firms you'd want to work for. And that's how I kind of got the referral to get in. But I'm definitely a small company person. My career previous to tech was like larger company stuff, like just it wasn't really my vibe, whereas I think what I liked about working at Hirewell, working at a smaller firm, was just that you could more openness to do new things, try new things, start like I did tech recruiting for 10 years, and no offense, Karl, for 10 years, I couldn't talk to any more tech people. I just can't. You talk to a lot of developers. It's hard after a while, every day, all day, especially when a lot of them are unhappy at their jobs or, whatever. So, but it was a cool time because, and you're also in marketing now. So this kind of pivots into that. And 2015 was an interesting time in digital marketing because that's when it wasn't just agencies and e-commerce firms doing it. It's like everyone started I lucked into a big account. It was a real estate firm who's building out their first digital shop. So I took this meeting. They're asking us to hire some UX people, which we had experience doing. And they said, oh, we need to hire 30 digital marketers. They started rattling off. We need social media person, SEO person, SEM person. Can you help with that? I'm like, of course we can, and there were no marketing recruiting firms in Chicago at that point. Like there was it's not like but it ended up, we knocked out of the park. It was just a breath of fresh air. Like it was a very different cycle of qualifying and talking to people. But that's where, and then I started just continuing on the journey of talking to marketers all day. A year later, I'm like, wait, why aren't we doing this shit? Why aren't we doing podcasts and all these kind of things, which kind of put us on that path. And then I ended up, building that out, focusing more on the sales side and recruitment side, and then kind of building that out for the whole company, not just for me or my division. So that's the journey in a nutshell. Is kind of, it all makes sense how from point A to point B, but why I've joined. You couldn't do that in a large firm. You couldn't just one day say, hey, I'm going to stop recruiting tech people. I'm going to start recruiting marketing people, Your role is too pigeonholed.
They have a set place that James belongs, and James will sit there and do that job until he earns the promotion to the next set place that James can go, right? Whereas a small company, again, like you said, you can kind of build your own path. Like, hey guys, we don't have marketing. Can I do marketing for the firm? Okay, great. I'll be the, chief growth officer. And again, I'm sure it was a little more complex than that.
Well,
but
yeah, because I've had a background in writing and stuff before that. So like starting out with blogs and stuff wasn't like completely foreign to me and whatnot. But it was funny because the first 6 months, like everyone thought I was wasting my time. Yeah, like everyone's just like, why are you like this is nothing going to come from this? And all of a sudden, like some clients started to come in, people started to notice us. And I think the biggest thing for us was that it made us easier to hire people because like we went from like we were known in Chicago, but no one knew us outside of Chicago, right? But we started getting more people in a broader reach and being more memorable. I'd start like people who I lost contact with would get back in touch saying, hey, I saw this and that. Like it has an impact. It's just not like super measurable. So it helps the most with hiring and with like people that maybe you fell out of touch with or don't talk to as much as you should, like remembering to get back in touch when they'd actually need your help, which is invaluable because those are the things that you completely forget about. So
totally. What's so hard about marketing, especially for small businesses, is that it is probably a 12-month process to get any real results out of it that you can really point to in most cases, even if you know what you're doing. It's like spinning up something like a blog and SEO and content. Again, you might maybe get lucky early on and get a couple quick wins out of it, but it's not likely in your first 3 months of doing that stuff you're going to get this big flow of new business, right? And so as so many small agencies really struggle to go over the hump of like just stick with it long enough to actually start to see results, and then the snowball builds. How did you get the founders on board to kind of stick with you there? Like, was there a debate ever, or was it more of just like you were kind of doing it on the side while you're doing your other job, and eventually you start to see results and like, okay, you can put more time into that?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, no one really ever tells you no, and if they do, I ignore them. I mean, it's just our CEO was behind the idea. He was one of the many people who thought I was maybe spending too much, but it really wasn't that much time. Because the thing is, I can't understate this enough. Like having a background doing a little bit of writing and blogging and stuff before, like the stuff I create, I believe I'm able to do probably 2 to 3 times faster than the average person, just because it's like old hat to me. I've done it for so long, and I like it. I like writing because I believe that it helps. A lot of the stuff I write, we're pulling insights from our team, from the front lines of challenges that companies are having, challenges that our recruiters are having, challenges in the market in general. And then it helps me and then articulating that in written form first is usually what I do. It better helps me get my thoughts around how I can explain it to potential clients. How can I explain it on your show? Like, it's not just you're making posts, but you're actually developing your ongoing talking points you're going to have in other conversations, which they sound better once you put them on paper and you realize, here's what I'm missing, will strengthen this, and then you're committing it to memory. So it's not like, hey, you're wasting time creating content, because you're also like making yourself smarter and sound smarter when you're having live conversations, which I think is a big issue with a lot of people's sales processes. Like, you probably talk to people trying to sell you stuff that they're really thin on their knowledge base, you know what I mean? But if someone can actually kind of give you more commentary and context on kind of the broader things, what they're trying to do. So
I think that's fantastic insight right there, James. I'll just kind of pause you because there's a saying, and I'm sure there's a whole quote that goes with this, that like writing is thinking. And what that's always meant to me is that the ability to write an idea down, or a sales pitch, or whatever it is down, forces you to think about the organizational structure and the hierarchy of how to present this idea, right? I was just working on this the other day. I was asked to give like a personal story kind of talk in a small group. And like, that's something where I could do it off the top of my head, sure, but writing it down really forced me to think in logical terms about the story I'm trying to tell, the cadence. What am I gonna like? What's the struggle? Where's the up and down? Kind of, the arc of it. And I think people undervalue that, or sort of they ignore that. And you're right, like writing those blog posts that tell those stories and just refining it over hundreds and hundreds of words and thousands of words makes you a better salesperson and makes you better at just doing this stuff live like this, because you've said those things 1,000 times in different written forms, so you figured out exactly how it works, right? That's a fantastic insight.
Yeah, precisely. And they come up in and that was, I think, that once people started realizing, or I should say, once once people saw the success of the content, and once we started, like, those became stories we can tell, because insights is huge. Like, I don't care what your industry is, if you have more insights and provide more commentary on the bigger picture than your competitors do, when you're in front of a client, like, you're just going to come across as far more knowledgeable.
Totally. Yep.
And one of the best practices we have is every other week we have a leadership meetings where we talk about this stuff. We also have like meetings where anybody who just wants to join, we just talk about like what's happening right now, what pissed you off this week, what struggle your client had, what questions people are asking you, what's coming up as new, and making sure everyone can kind of share those things, which makes us, but then we can put that into, okay, here are the things we should be talking about. Here's like a monthly report on the newest trends we're seeing and this and that. So when people have these, that way it's not just centralized in my head, everyone else can kind of get their hands on it and make everyone else better. But so back to your initial question, no one tried to shut me down. Yes, people thought I was wasting my time, but after a while they realized, no, we need to lean harder into this, which is why we actually have, I want to say 5 different podcasts in-house now.
Wow,
so,
nice.
We have we have several other people in different divisions of the company that kind of have, like, they'll have, some of them are more focused on getting like different contacts and clients in. Some of them are more just kind of different kind of commentary based podcasts. It's just kind of all over the map, but it's people who want to do it. Like, they enjoy it, they like it, and it's been good. So.
Yeah. What else do you think contributed to Hirewell's success in the recruiting space? Because again, between when I started my career in tech 15-ish years ago, and now there's, a dime a dozen recruiting agencies in Chicago. It's it's such an easy business to start, low barrier to entry. Kind of like marketing agencies, millions of them, right? And then you guys have survived all the ups and downs, and are a fairly good sized company at this point. You're not huge, but you're bigger than bigger than most of the recruiting firms. So give me a little bit of like, what are some of the elements you think have led to that success? Marketing is obviously one, we're kind of talking about that already, but obviously you've executed well. Like, what other things have stood out to you?
Off the top of my head, the 2 things I would say first is always refining processes. Like, you have to make sure, like, the only way you can consistently deliver for a client is by making sure everyone's on the same page and how we go about it. So a lot of, and if there's a benefit for working one of these awful agencies before you work at a good agency, it's that they all tend to have very regimented, like, process for how to recruit somebody. You know what I mean? It's very robotic, it's very wooden, but you're not skipping any steps. And so, we had plenty to draw from in terms of what our best practices should be, as well as how to kind of better refine those. So so delivering, I guess the short story is like, being able to make sure you actually can do what you say you can do is kind of the first. The second is we intentionally diversified our services by industries and by skill sectors, which I think I said it kind of earlier in the podcast. That's rare. Like, most recruiting firms do one thing, maybe 2 things. Not many have the width and bandwidth to have people who are focused in sales, then separate people who are focused in finance and accounting, and be able to talk to their contacts and credibly say they can actually do all these different areas. Nor can they put a larger solution around it. Like, you can't really solution sell if all you do is one thing, and your client might need to hire 20 people, but only 2 of them are what you do. Like, there's no solution to sell there.
Has that also helped with resiliency for the business? Like, so for example,
100%.
If tech is down, you've got some finance and accounting roles, you can keep the thing afloat. Okay.
That's what we're seeing right now specifically.
Yeah.
So like, last year was a bad year for everybody in recruiting. 2023 is terrible. And that was coming after 2 boom years. So 2021, early 2022, probably we may never see like that much binge hiring done ever again, or at least in a decade. Then the pendulum swung the other way and a lot of people got crushed. Where we just had our best 4 months in the last 2 years. So from like August to just November, were really good months. Like, we're back, like, feeling really good where things are going, but it's been very asymmetric. Like, our finance and accounting, we've seen tons of demand there, a lot of demand in industrial, which is like manufacturing, engineering, supply chain. So not the office dorks, like more people who actually do stuff for a living. And then, strange enough, our go-to-market team, like sales, but it's a lot of non-tech sales. It's a lot of those manufacturing companies. Like, our biggest client this year is a company that does like custom kitchen cabinets and countertops and remodeling stuff. And they've been binge hiring salespeople, and it's been great. But like, this is in contrast to tech is starting to come back slowly, but like, so both tech hiring and sales within tech, it's starting to come back, but it's just not there. Marketing's still not doing great. HR is still not doing great. But I bring this up because I do have friends and other that, like, I have a good friend who does focused in sales recruiting and SaaS, still struggling. Like, there's just not the demand there. Companies that we hired someone recently who was a very, very good tech recruiter. His company basically went under, and there's a lot of places like that.
Yeah. All my friends that were in tech recruiting, like half of their companies shut down this last 2 years.
Yeah. There's been a lot of that, and it's still happening, which is like, and to my mind, it's like, oh, things are getting better for everyone, but I still talk to other places like it's still not. So, but it's both skill and industry sector. I think you have to have both. But I think it's making sure you're diversified enough, which is hard when you're small. Like we've gotten to a point where we're 80 people roughly right now. And so we have enough people to be able to kind of have enough focus areas. But if you're still a 5-person firm, it's hard to have that diversity level, so it's.
And I think there's like an arc that you have to follow. And, from talking to a lot of people like yourself who've gone through these ups and downs and weathered it, it's like, it's really good to start a small business in a niche that is very specific and very small and very like, you do one thing really well and hopefully ride that niche's market to grow you, right? But at some point you need to start to say, like, we have to do more than just that if we want to stay alive when this market, sort of hits its ups and downs, especially like, if you're focused in tech or something very volatile like that, or something that could be subject to like compliance or regulatory changes or whatever that could all of a sudden just shut you to zero. You really want to have some second or third like revenue streams that are in different industries with different customer bases, or else, so you just you're too brittle. So that's a really good, it feels like you guys have nailed that.
Yeah, I started my career during the dot-com bust, and then the financial crisis happened. And Matt, our CEO, kind of the same thing with him. The dot-com bust, people probably still can't understand like how bad the tech market was then. There were top flight developers that couldn't find work. There were no fucking jobs for developers then, which even by standard now seems bonkers. But and then we saw the opposite. So the financial collapse, like we did okay during that because we were still focused. We did tech and we did HR at that point, and mostly still tech was by far our biggest area. But like, I think tech probably survived that better than other areas, especially since we happen to have a lot of service-based companies. Like, because there were a lot of tech consultants, because a lot of companies laid off tech people, but then they hired consultancies to fill the gaps, and we actually work with a lot of companies like that. So we saw the importance of diversifying the second time through it. That we were lucky that we were in a sector was okay, but we had friends in other sectors that got crushed and went out of business. We're just like, we can't let that happen to us, because there was going to be a next time. And that's why it kind of became a sprint on like, how can we spent the next 10 years, up until like, COVID, or even still now, like, how can we get our hands in as many pots and get people in that can know these different areas that we can do that as well as possible. So
this is kind of why I rail against people who are like, I just want to run a small business that stays small forever. And I'm like, well, good luck. But, you're going to face these ups and downs. Just be ready to go to zero someday because your market kind of changes around you. Like, it's the same idea as like people who want to run a passive business. Like, it just doesn't exist in the long term. Sure, you might get a period of 4 or 5 years of like, it feels passive. You can step away and do nothing. But like, the market changes. Like every market is volatile. And it can change fast. Yeah, it can change so fast.
It's not like you see it coming where it's like, oh, no. I have 2 years to figure this out to do something new. Like it can be like, you look at COVID, look at the 2023 and hiring's a prime. Yeah. Like in 2022, beginning of the year, it looked like an unstoppable hiring market where every recruiting firm was going to make a ton of money. And then by the end of the year, everything's shifted so quick that you had no time to react. And we were even like, it was like, we thought, oh, that's down. It'll recover later. Because in COVID, we saw a crash, but it recovered by the end of the year. You know what I mean? And we're like, oh, that's going to happen. It did not happen again.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, I will admit, some industries are always going to be a little more, some specializations are always going to be a little more exposed to these ups and downs, like recruiting. Naturally, it's going to be a harder hit by the lows and highs, right? Because it's like, it's a second order kind of thing that people are using. And so when growth stops, recruiting stops. And so, it's tough.
I'm so glad you said that because people don't understand that concept, that it's unique in that respect. Whereas you can be in a company that's flatlining, but your job's totally safe because like you said, it's just like a steady state, but that company does not need a recruiter. You know what I mean? Like you need growth or you need high turnover, which sucks to need a recruiter. So,
Right.
And it's funny that some people just don't have a hard time wrapping their head around that concept. So
Yeah, it's a tough industry, but again, this is why like the highs are probably very high too, because then you go through these boom times where like everybody needs to hire 100 people today and they're willing to pay anything for it. And so, yeah, you got to ride the waves, be ready for that.
There is one outlier in the whole thing though, is finance and accounting, because I mean, we've been doing that for maybe 5 years now. If I can start, that's the one area that is recession proof. Like you can't fire your accountants. Like you need people. Like if there's
Right.
one area that like always has, and there's not enough of them nowadays. I don't know if you've followed that market. But not enough people are actually going into the field. So, but that we might advice to anyone out there getting the recruiting for the first time. Recruit the number crunchers. It's the most stable, steady.
Another trend that I'm always curious how it affects you and the companies you work with is international hiring. It's gotten easier to, especially if you're in a remote environment, to hire people internationally than it has been in the past. My perception is, again, both my companies are all remote, a lot of international hires. And so my perception is the cultural differences are also a lot lower than they used to be. It used to be 15 years ago when we hired offshore devs and teams, it was tougher to work with them and make them understand what we were trying to do and sort of build cultural rapport with them. Whereas now, my team members halfway across the world, like they get the same memes that I do. You know what I mean? So what I mean is the culture just seems to have globalized, really, and not 100%, but there's a lot more of that. Have you guys noticed that? Is that happening more? Like, are you doing global recruiting too, or are you still focused on the kind of hybrid and in-person jobs that do require people to be there?
We aren't doing global recruiting. We do have a partner firm that's in the UK that does executive search in the UK, Europe. They do have we sold a project with them they work in India. So there'll be this acquisition we made a while ago. So we do some of that, yes. But in general, the most of our business, the more interesting thing, I think, it's definitely a threat that I think people aren't quite aware that is happening. You can get resources, to your point, that are the communication and the cultural differences are less than they were. The wages are way cheaper. The talent is getting better, whether it's Central America or Eastern Europe. Because I think you were saying 15 years ago, it was pretty much like India.
Yeah, when I was an engineer at GE 15, 20 years ago, it was India, and it was I'll tell this quick story because it kind of illustrates how different it was then. They would bring a team from India over to do like AutoCAD drawings and things, and they'd stick them in a separate room or building than the rest of the American engineers. It's kind of weird. It was bizarre the way they did it. And they would kind of just like they'd speak their own languages. They had their own like little subculture that they worked within in the broader GE. Now, again, like very different kind of company and it's a different world, but like my team members who are in South Africa or India or Nigeria are very much plugged into what Americans and Western Europeans do day to day. Like they don't have any problem following along with the cultural sort of nuance, and like we laugh about some of the differences, but like it's all very open. The English is much better too. So I just noticed this is like really shifted. And again, these are younger, they tend to be a little younger too. So maybe it's a generational thing. Maybe we've got a younger generation that's growing up in more of a global culture, but I don't know. We'll see how that shifts in the next 5-20 years.
But there's more areas too that I feel like a lot of great, because this is why sales is great. Sales recruiting is great because a very, very, very common client for us are European or Asia Pacific based companies that want a US based sales force. That's the one thing that always has to kind of be here. But we have a lot of clients too that like they're only hiring engineers in like Ukraine or someplace like that. So I think it's going to become more and more common. Like I do feel like the combination of AI and offshoring is driving down costs of a lot of skill sets, and I think it's hard to say how much of an impact that's going to make. But it's something. It's definitely real. It's definitely happening. I mean, I have a contact. She runs an offshoring firm based out of Africa, where they have a considerable amount of highly qualified college educated people, but there's not many jobs there. And I have a couple friends who have used her for, cold calling BDR types and marketers, like little lower level roles, but they just get like really, really high quality work, and the cost is a fraction of what it does, for here. And that's going to continue to be a problem, I think, for like the American labor markets, is that like
it's like threat / opportunity, right? It's a little of both. I agree with you. Yeah.
If you're an employer, it's great. If you're, if you're a junior level marketer, it's not great, so.
Personally, competition is good, I think, in general, because what it forces everyone to do is lean into their unique strengths and figure out how to do the things better. Like you said, there is absolutely, and both my companies are like this, a role for US-based American, native English American speakers to do sales. That will always be a thing because it's very hard. There are issues that come up when you have an accent and you're doing sales. It's just right now the case. But that said, I agree with you 100% on Africa. Also, their infrastructure has gotten much better for internet. I mean, one of the other big barriers 5-10 years ago was that you couldn't get people in the Philippines or Africa with really good, stable internet unless they lived in one or two major cities. That's kind of not true. Now we've got second and third tier cities where the internet is good enough for video calls even. And so there's a lot happening there. And yeah, I agree. It's a threat if you're a junior level marketer who is trying to like come in at the most, like with the least skills possible, and you're not really somebody who stands out, but it's going to push the bar higher if nothing else.
The other thing I'll say on sales too is because it's not even just communication skills, it's also like culture, and I don't want to say being willingness to be pushy, but like we had a client that was actually in Norway or Sweden. I think the two gentlemen were both kind of in the Norwegian areas, two different countries. I think it was Sweden and Norway. And they're hiring people in the US for sales, and they were like blown away. Like these are the best salespeople we've ever talked to. And I'm like, they're good. They're not necessarily the best of the best, but they're like, they were shocked. It's just because it's a different cultural thing. People are just more motivated here from a sales standpoint and willing to like do the work, versus it's just a different vibe. There's not as much urgency, I think, in certain countries, you know what I mean? And talked to another gentleman who does recruiting, and he does a lot of his staff's in Central America, and he's like recruiting, like I hate to say this, but recruiting standpoint, like these guys work harder than a lot of our American staff. They're just as good, but they can't sell. Like it's more like because like they kind of view themselves, or they're more order takers. Like they want to make the client happy, versus they don't feel comfortable like telling the client like when they're being dumb. You know what I mean? So
yeah, there are absolutely some like cultural norms and differences that make certain areas tend to attract more people that are good at certain skill sets, for sure. I will say though that I've noticed again in the last few years, there's kind of more people breaking those molds than I would have expected a few years before. And I think it is, again, they've got kind of more of a global culture building than used to be true. So we'll see how this, again, it'll shift in the next 5 to 20 years. This stuff is ever changing, which is kind of some of the fun / challenging part about it, I guess. All right, James, we've talked about serious stuff. Let's talk about even more serious stuff. You are a fiction writer, and I love that about you because it's like one of my dreams. I'm not even going to say it's a closeted dream because I actually talk about this occasionally. It is on my bucket list to write a book someday, and I want to do a nonfiction one and a fiction one. And you've already started writing the short stories in fiction. So tell me a little about your sci-fi writing you do, and let's just dig into that for a second.
I do get bored of writing for LinkedIn. Like that's where I kind of stem from. Like this is such JV writing. Like what am I doing? This is so dumb. Like I want to be a real writer that does real shit, not this like whatever. But I told them my friends, because I am the kind of like once I say something, I commit to something, like I have to follow through. You know what I mean? So I
love that. Yeah,
I'm not a flaky person, So when I told my friends like I'm gonna write a book someday, just like you just said. But I'm like, shit, how do I even do that? Like I've never wrote like an actual story before. I've only done like,
right.
Snarky business writing has been kind of my wheelhouse. So I took a online class, and like you realize that like the structure of writing, fiction writing, it's pretty set. Like you'll like it once they kind of go through with you, you're like, this isn't that hard. Like it's, and then it's took a couple other classes that kind of gave some of that, and then but in all these classes you're doing writing, you're writing stories. Now I kind of wrote a couple things, and this was, I want to say, mid last year. And then when the year started, I'm like, okay, my goal is to get one story published, right? And I had this one, it was like a short story I wrote halfway through like one of the classes I took. and I just submitted it to this one site. And 2 days later, like accepted. I'm like, oh my God, this is so easy. Like it's just like that.
Fish in a barrel. Yeah.
I'm like, I guess and this is like February 1st. I'm like, I just hit my yearly goal. So, but then you kind of get the bug, and I've gotten 5 stories published this year, and I've been writing flash fiction. So these are 1,000-word or less stories. These are stories you can get out pretty quickly. Like it might take me 4 to 5 hours total between like brainstorming time, writing time, and kind of editing time. So, and whatnot. And it's a lot of fun. My stories are, it's definitely, if you're familiar with my LinkedIn writing, my stories have a similar to smart-ass kind of vibe. They're all, at least in my opinion, they're all humorous. I want to make people laugh. I'm a big fan of Kurt Vonnegut. He's easily my favorite writer, and I always admire his ability to take the most depressing topics, but you don't feel depressing when you're reading them because it's just funny,
right.
Like you can make fun of the darkest stuff in life,
Totally.
And that's always, so that's my, I've got, I can send you the link if you want to, kind of post them. But see, I've gotten 5 stories published. My goal for next year is I need to start writing longer things though. So it is a time commitment. But building up to like the novel I want to write someday, I have to start writing more complex structures and longer, not longer for the sake of being longer, but more detailed, multiple plots, kind of that type of thing, which I haven't gotten to yet. But
I love it. And I love it for a number of reasons. One, because I'm a kind of a fan of sci-fi, and I like Kurt Vonnegut, and I like some of the classic sci-fi, like Philip K. Dick and that genre or generation of sci-fi writers. And it reminds me of that. And but also on the other side, I love people who set a goal like that and they don't just make it a dream they talk about. Most of my friends who say they want to write a book, they talk more about wanting to write a book than ever making any progress on writing a book, right? Look, I get it. Like most people are like that, and it's a fun thing to do at parties, to talk about your dreams and things you want to do. But I love people that actually take the first steps to doing it. And like, look, it may take you 10 years or maybe you never actually finish writing a book, but at least you start publishing something. It's friggin' awesome, right? Like that's such a rare thing. Like how many tech recruiters or people who work in tech and recruit can say they've gotten actual stories published? Like it's like a tiny fraction. It's just a cool overlap of skills. So good for you.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. The one did win an award from like the best piece that publication had that month. So that was fun. But
that's awesome.
To your point too, that's the thing that's tough, is that I have other interests on top of that, and you can't do them all. And when you're an adult, you're working a job, you can't chase everything at the same time. So it's kind of balancing it. But to your point though too, like I also, when I start doing something, it's like I feel like I need to keep going. I don't want to stop, because it's almost like a dopamine thing, you know what I mean? Which is why I'm almost taking a step back from flash fiction, because like what I liked about that is I could write it quick, I could submit it, I could get it published, and I felt like but at some point it's like, okay, I need to redo the plan, find something because at some point that's not going to get me closer to the book. You know what I mean?
Right.
So,
well, progress is addicting is the way I think about it. Like, especially for achievers. And when you can, a thing like writing short stories like that's really good is you can immediately build progress, and that progress makes you want to go do bigger and bigger things, right? Like it's like, for me, it was getting into running for the first time. It's like running that first mile was really exciting. Then I ran 3 miles, and then I ran a half marathon, then I ran a marathon. It's just, it built for me. I couldn't stop once I got going until I got injured, but like, this is a similar thing. Like you could see the measurable little steps of progress, even though each one of those steps, maybe 1,000-word story, doesn't sound like that big a deal, but it really is in aggregate once you get going. What are you reading these days, James? Anything you've read in the last few months? This is always my last question. I love to hear what other people are reading.
First off, I'm more of an audiobook listener, which is why I think I'm better writing dialogue, because I write what I hear. You know what I mean? I am reading another Vonnegut book, Galapagos, which I had not read previously. But I also reading a few mystery. Anthony Horowitz. I don't know if you know him. He's done a bunch of TV and detective novels. He's a British dude, but a lot of the Magpie Murders, Moonflower Murders, which are both books and TV shows. But he has like a 5 series where he's playing himself in the book, so it's like metafiction, and he's kind of like the Watson versus Holmes character. So but they're good. They're good audiobooks to listen to. So I'm trying to think. The Word is Murder is the first one in that series. I finished that, and I just finished the second one. I forget the name of it. So anyway.
Cool. I'll check that out. I've been reading some murder mysteries at night. That's my like go to bed reading, because it usually takes me out of my own worries and thinking about like business stuff, which I need to get out away from that while I'm going to sleep. So I'll have to check that out.
Last thing, because you're sci-fi, Mao Goes to War. Write that down. So that's a good one. It's very AI focused, but
love it. Yeah.
Anyways,
okay, good. Yes, James. Always a pleasure to speak with you. This has been really fun, and we covered all sorts of random, far-reaching things. If people want to get in touch with you, reach out, whether about recruiting at Hirewell or other things, what's the best way?
Hit me on LinkedIn. So it's just James Hornick. My URL for LinkedIn, whatever, is just the /James Hornick. Easiest way there.
We'll put the link in there.
Yeah, you can find me easy.
Cool. Thanks, James. I appreciate the time.
Cool. Thanks, Karl.
Thank you for watching this episode of Retain Trust. If you like this one, give it a thumbs up and subscribe on YouTube. It takes 2 seconds and it helps others find out about the show. And if you have questions or suggestions for a future episode, leave a comment. See you next time.